What is assisted dying? The definition of assisted dying is the suicide of a person suffering from an incurable disease using a fatal dose of drugs provided by a doctor for this purpose. However, it is argued that using the term suicide can implicate something egregious, and removal of this term would be beneficial. Assisted dying allows the patient to choose the way and timing of their imminent death, where suicide is better defined by choosing death over life even if one is not dying. Each of these following countries use the terms assisted suicide, euthanasia, and assisted dying, and they all can mean different things, and each of these countries follows their own practices and regulations. The Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg all allow euthanasia and assisted suicide. Switzerland permits assisted suicide under certain pretenses. Colombia allows euthanasia only. The United States of Vermont, California, Oregon, Washington, and Montana all sanction assisted dying. Canada, as of June 6, 2016, allows voluntary euthanasia. What is the criteria for accepting euthanasia patients in Canada? We will begin with Quebec, as their legislation is slightly different. Their legislation is entitled Medical Aid in Dying, and the patient must meet 6 of the following criteria. They must be insured within the means of the Health Insurance Act, be of full age and capable of giving consent to care, be at the end of life, suffer from a serious and incurable illness, be in advanced state of irreversible decline in capability, and the patient must experience constant and unbearable physical or psychological pain which cannot be relieved in a manner that the person deems tolerable. The criteria for the rest of the country is quite similar to the criteria Quebec has put forth. As of June 6, the Supreme Court of Canada made voluntary euthanasia legal and available under very strict terms. The terms include the person needing to be competent, the person must be clearly able to consent to termination of life, has a significant and incurable disease, illness, or disability that causes suffering to the patient that said patient considers unendurable. The practice of euthanasia is now legal, even though the federal portion is currently in an indeterminate state. Ontarians that opt for assisted dying will not be charged for the drugs used to end their life. The Ontario College of Physicians and Surgeons worked with the province to help create protocols, and once the federal government creates legislation, those protocols may be updated and revisited as needed. The rules and regulations are still very unclear to many physicians. However, the CPSO will be offering guidelines to help. A referral system is currently being set up for patients if their current doctor is reluctant to provide assistance for multiple reasons, whether it be religion or ethical. In Ontario, there are 4 places where the assisted death can take place, and it includes hospitals, long-term care facilities, hospice, or the patient's home.
Ontario will allow hospitals to opt out of providing assisted death with their institutions. Hospitals will be required to transfer the total care to a different institution for the patient to receive additional advice and consultation on their end-of-life treatment. Since the middle of January, 31 Canadians asked doctors for assisted death. Numbers may rise since a few provinces are not ready to share data on this issue. As of now, Ontario appears to have the highest request. Opposed to legalization of assisted dying. The biggest argument for legalizing physician-assisted suicide is the patient's choice and right to die. Many patients who fall terminally ill or have unresolved physical symptoms where they can't deal with the pain feel the need to take their lives into their own hands and want the choice to die with dignity. Many patients accompanied by constant physical symptoms of their illness feel the need to hasten their deaths to ensure their independence, lessen the burden on their family members, and control their loss of meaning in life. In some cases, the patients may stop eating and drinking on their own if the physician won't stand by their wishes, because they want to die with dignity. In 1997, Oregon was the first state in America to allow physician-assisted suicide with the Oregon Death with Dignity Act. The law states that the patient must have 2 physicians diagnose that they have 6 or less months to live, and the patient is able to make the independent decision to take a lethal dose of medication to end their life. They allow a 15-day waiting period from the patient's request in case they change their mind. Based on the physician reports, the patient's choice was based on decrease of quality of life, loss of autonomy, loss of control of bodily functions, and feeling like a burden to their family. A study conducted by Toll in 2014 discovered that out of 1,384 chronically ill persons that could opt for physician-assisted suicide, almost half were in favor, and one-fifth of them considered it themselves. The study demonstrates that although physician-assisted suicide is an option, it is still rare for it to be carried out, but it allows the patients the choice of how they wish to end their life. As of June 17, 2016, Canada has legalized physician-assisted suicide. Previously, the Criminal Code of Canada rendered physician-assisted suicide as a homicide and against the law. But the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom, being a higher law, highlights autonomy and dignity. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person and the right not to be deprived thereof except in accordance with the principle of fundamental justice. As a result, the Supreme Court Canada decision voluntary euthanasia will be legal at the very least for a competent adult person who clearly consents to the termination of life and has grievous and irremediable medical conditions, including illness, disease, or disability that causes enduring suffering that is intolerable to the individual in the circumstances of his or her condition. 78% of Canadians polled their views for physician-assisted suicide in Canada were in favor, while 9% were strongly against. Publication. In this article, The Right to Try is embodied in The Right to Die. The author discusses the options of the right to try to live and the right to die. In 2014, we heard about Brittany Maynard, a 29-year-old woman who had terminal brain cancer, who decided to move to Oregon to take her own life. Brittany utilized her right to die and decided this was the best option for her and her family. In contrast, Abigail Burrows, a 21-year-old woman with head and neck cancer, decided she wanted to try to live even after exhausting all medical options available to her. Abigail had discovered an experimental treatment for her disease and lobbied for approval of the treatment to the FDA, U.S. Congress, and pharmaceutical companies, but to no benefit. Unfortunately, Abigail died of her disease after the experimental treatment had finally been approved. The article argues that if drugs can be prescribed to take a life, why can't they not be prescribed to save one? Ultimately, the article argues both sides, but the emphasis is the patient has the right to choose how they wish to live or end their life. It was interesting that the article discussed the right to live and attempt experimental treatment options, as some people had traveled to European countries to gain access to the treatments because they are approved there, as opposed to North America. But obviously that isn't an option for everyone. If legalizing physician-assisted suicide becomes common practice, then it opens the door to discussing why treatments are available in some countries and not others when they are saving lives. However, the article tended to have a slightly biased tone, where they seemed to be more in favor of the right to live instead of the right to die. They also mentioned that the lethal injection prescription is given with uncertain efficacy, which can be true to an extent, but is also very rare.
With all decisions, there are pros and cons to be weighed. Cons to legalization of assisted dying in Ontario. Many physicians do not want to take on the responsibility of ending a person's life. Many feel unprepared and feel that they weren't educated enough to do so, and that it's not part of their responsibility as a physician. Another question to ask is, will medical-assisted suicide add additional stress and workload to primary care providers? Will the mental health of our providers be affected? Will there be support and resources if this does occur? And lastly, from a religious perspective, who are we to play God? Who are we to end one's life? In terms of support for physicians, the College of Physicians and Surgeons released guidelines in every province and one territory that doctors must follow in providing medical assistance in dying. This is a guideline for them to follow as a support on how to carry out the process. Two examples from the guideline are 2 independent physicians must agree a patient meets their criteria set out by the Supreme Court, and the patient must be competent throughout the process. There's also a referral service set up for doctors unwilling or unable to help patients die. Those patients can then be referred to a physician who is willing to take on that responsibility. Lastly, education. Some universities, such as the University of Manitoba, are developing educational programs for medical students on physician-assisted dying so that our future physicians will be more equipped and knowledgeable in this area.
Assisted death has become not only a national headline, but has been discussed globally. We hear the stories on the news about assisted death and doctors being charged since it is still illegal in many countries. Many find this to be a touchy subject, and there are also many arrayed opinions. In Canada, there has been talk about legalizing assisted death for many years. There have been appeals in court, and bills have been passed in recent months. We not only hear about this news in newspapers, but we also hear about it on news channels such as CTV and in recent films such as Me Before You, starring Sam Claflin and Emilia Clarke, which is currently in theaters. This movie is the story of a man who seeks out assisted death as a selfless act of love, which raises much speculation from critics that the wrong image was given surrounded assisted death. Many felt in this film that this did not give a full value to life, that we must fully understand what life holds before doing such a thing, which they believe the movie failed to do. Going back to the bill that was passed in Canada on June 6th of this year, it stated that assisted death can only be used on a competent adult person who 1. Clearly consents to the termination of life, and 2. Has a grievous and irremediable medical condition, including an illness, disease, or disability that causes enduring suffering that is intolerable to the individual and the circumstances of his or her condition. This does not include children. The person must fully understand the meaning of life and what they are doing to themselves, the consequences of what they are doing to themselves as well. They must have a chronic disease that inevitably will lead to death in a short duration of time, in which it will and is unfair to prolong life with pain. The movie Me Before You captures the life of a young, healthy male who got into an automobile accident and becomes paralyzed from the neck down. Now wheelchair-ridden for the rest of his life, he does not see the value to life and wishes to seek assisted death in Switzerland. This movie portrays the theme that death is better than living with a disability, which many critics do not agree with, but I think is unfair to make these accusations without being in one's place who has a disability. The treatment he wishes to receive is called Dignitas and is legal in Switzerland. He feels he's now a burden to his family with his disability and that they must now hire a nanny to take care of him, and he is no longer independent. He believes this burden outweighs his value for life, and in his selfless act of love for his family, he seeks assisted death. He also does this as he cannot live in a state of pain and disability after living life in a healthy state for so long. His death is inevitable and his pain has no cure, which allows it to be possible for him to seek such treatment. He promises his mother he will live an extra 6 months than he planned, since she wants him to see the true value of life before he makes a final decision. In the end, though, he does not see this value and ends his life. One may ask if this movie properly portrayed assisted death. I think in a way it did, and in another way it did not. I think feeling as though you are a burden and feeling pain from a disability is accurate. I do not think that doing such an act for others is a good enough reason to end one's life. I do not think they competently understand the consequences of assisted death if that is their reasoning behind it. I believe that assisted death should only be used in cases of chronic diseases where there is no cure and one's life and pain is only being prolonged. This could include disability as well. Critics did not agree with this depiction of assisted death as it treats suicide as medical care. They feel that one can commit such an act without the consequences, as it can now be seen as medical treatment. In the movie, Me Before You, ageism is not present. This movie is about a young male living with a disability. There is no connection to ageism, as ageism is a stereotyping towards elders. For example, thinking that many elders are incapable of being independent since they are all in a chronic condition and must be in old age homes. In the health field, though, assisted death can coincide with ageism. As I mentioned before with ageism, Many have a very stereotypical view on elders, which is not the case. The population believes that they are all very dependent on others, as they are all chronically ill. There are elders who live life like that, but there are also many healthy elders who live independently and are relatively healthy. I believe the population has views that assisted death is sought by many or all elders, and only elders, which is not the case. Again, it can be sought by them, but this is not only to be found to be used in this population, but is used in other populations as well. This, I believe, is a true case of ageism.